Yeah. Meeting will please come to order. Barbara, please call the roll.
We have Commissioners Fleming, Funderburk, Levine, and Noonan present.
Thank you. We just learned Commissioner Barad is ill and won't be here today, and Commissioner Funderburk has to leave early. This proceeding is broadcast on Channel 35. The exact broadcast times can be found by contacting Channel 35. My opening remarks are to wish everybody a Happy New Year and to say stay strong. Report or briefing by the General Manager, including reports from Water, Power, and Administrative System Management.
Nothing at this time.
Comments from Commissioners on agendized items and requests from Commissioners relating to departmental operations.
Mr. President, would I make a motion, given that our good friend Commissioner Broad is not here today and that Commissioner Funderburk is leaving, there's an item on the agenda today involving the Customer's Bill of Rights, and I think it wouldn't be the right conversation to have without the two of them joining us for the conversation. And also, it might give a little more time for the public to come in and have a conversation with us about the Customer's Bill of Rights, which is designed to serve them. So I would make a motion to move that to a future meeting.
Second. Those in favor?
Aye.
It's moved. Commissioner Noonan?
Thank you. I also have a request. Given the capacity that we serve as commissioners for this important utility organization, it just concerns me, the information that has been distributed about, I apologize, the grid being hacked in Vermont. And I would appreciate us having a closed session item about that to learn more about exactly what happened and how we can prevent that happening in Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
Noted. And I assume that that will occur. Thank you. As long as we're talking about deferral of items, at this point, I move that we defer item 15. Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
It's deferred. Let's see. Do we have any public comment cards? I'm not aware of any.
We have one for number 7. We deferred number 6, but we do have a speaker card for number 7.
Okay, well, once we get to number 7, we will call it. Comments from ratepayer advocate on agendized items.
We'll be part of a presentation on item 7. Other than that, we have no comments. If comments are necessary on items, we'll speak up.
Thank you. Okay, we have deferred item 6, and we are now at item 7, as Barbara presciently implied. Do you want to call the speaker card?
Okay, the speaker for item 7 is Tony Wilkinson.
On item 7, Tony Wilkinson, Chair of the Neighborhood Council, Department of Water and Power MOU Oversight Group. I am really looking forward to this presentation, but since we actually went through an election where by a very small margin, a DWP reform measure did not pass, we still have the challenge of renewing the department's workers and particularly senior managers. And I'm particularly concerned about the effect that we now have to deal with, and you as our representatives need to deal with, about how to help DWP renew its management, particularly with the absence of the flexibility that that reform measure would have provided. Because we're still looking at a huge turnover. I think that some things are going to be really upsetting when we see the effect on management of this salary survey. And together, we all need to really deal with this issue. It's a huge issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As usual, a very solid point. Who will be making this presentation?
I'll be starting it off, and we're going to take turns over a team of a half a dozen.
Tag team.
I'm Fred Pickle, Office of Public Accountability Ratepayer Advocate. This was an unusual joint study between the Office of Public Accountability Ratepayer Advocate and DWP. We've been working on this since midsummer, and we've been supported by a consulting team formed from two sides of Marsh McLennan. There is the Oliver Wyman consulting group represented by Jerry Yurkovitz, and Mercer is represented on cash compensation, health care and other benefits, and also pensions by the team of Elizabeth Toro, Heidi O'Brien, and Chuck Hartwig. So you're having a lot of senior industry expertise. This is, to my knowledge, the first time a total compensation study involving complete position matching has been done in any recent memory at DWP, and it's also unusual within the city for this having been done. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Okay.
We're rebooting that computer, if you wouldn't mind. Just give me a few minutes, please.
What's that?
We're rebooting the computer.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we'll reboot the computer, but maybe if we could have our Oliver Wyman. So as Dr. Pickle mentioned, this was a joint study that was done between Oliver Wyman, Mercer, the RPA, and DWP, and something where we went through a tremendous amount of rigor in doing this. We had, I think, about 3 or 4 meetings, 3 or 4 months worth of meetings between DWP staff and Oliver Wyman staff to ensure we had these job matches. This is really the next phase of benchmarking after the presentation we did in 2015. And so part of this is, again, with the Office of Public Accountability, it relates to how much what is the cash compensation. It'll be basically 3 levels, and I'll let them talk a little bit more about it. But basically between salaries, retirement benefits, health, and other benefits. And so we're going to go through, it's a comparison throughout the market of the different utilities, and they'll talk about the numbers. So with that, I'll go hand it over to Jerry.
It's getting there.
Getting there? Okay.
It's getting there. So again, I'm Jerry Yurkovitz from Oliver Wyman. I'm a utility kind of specialist. So you'll see some charts when the computer is, get a computer up, I'll show quartile performance, as Jeff said, across salaries, retirement, health, and other benefits, ranging from first arrayed to 4th quartile, where first would be the least cost, and 4th being the higher cost. And you'll show, we'll be showing a bunch of slides which will show the DWP's relative position in these 3 areas. And just for, like the benchmarking that was done in 2015, the department has kind of targeted the 2nd and 3rd quartiles as good as places to think about. That's where we should be, and that makes a lot of sense based on our experience in the utility business.
And if the slides were up, I'd be on slide 2. But my key point in this is DWP's total revenue per year is about $5 billion per year. DWP's total spending, since we're in an expansion period, is about $6 billion per year. And total spending on all things related to personnel is approaching $2 billion a year. So no matter how you measure it, it's a large factor. Another component is, as Tony Wilkinson already mentioned, we're going to be renewing a lot of staff over the next 5 to 10 years, and retaining people and hiring new people, both at the lower levels of the organization for movement up through the traditional movement up through the organization, and also at senior levels, is very important. So this is an important component. And finally, it's important for transparency. And now for the first chart we really need. And for that, we'll turn that over to Elizabeth Toro on what would be slide 3. And the commissioners have copies of these slides, and for those that want to follow along, we have copies of these slides here. Elizabeth, why don't you go ahead? You have a copy.
I do have a copy. I just wondered if everybody here.
Yes, everybody here has a copy of it.
Okay, so slide number 3, if you have it in front of you, is an overview of our methodology. The DWP provided Mercer with a census file consisting of all 10,000 employees. We reviewed the file with titles, tenure, annualized salaries, as that's the standard, I guess, comparison point for the market. And we selected initially 71 class codes to benchmark for the study. And in order to determine these 71, we picked various levels of the organization, and we tried to select a cross-section of joint, water, and power, so a broad sample of the organization. We were also trying to pick well-surveyed positions, so positions that we knew would be, common at the utility comparators. We presented that list to the DWP management, and they came back with 28 more class codes that they wanted us to include. They were high, I guess, population distribution class codes that they wanted us to try to benchmark. So we were up to, at that point, 99 class codes. We then went through, we used 4 survey services, nationally recognized survey services, AWWA, ERI, and 2 Mercer surveys focused on the energy and utility space. So we used those 4 surveys, and yes.
One quick question. There's no doubt that the job classifications, many of them are very, very outdated. So do you have a comment about that and how other municipalities are dealing with upgrading or modernizing job classifications?
For this study, we focused solely on the responsibilities of each of the job classifications. So the title, the roles and responsibilities, the requirements for the job, how many years you need to be there, what certifications you needed, and that sort of thing, and we compared that way.
And so just to elaborate, having served on the Personal Grievance Committee for many years now, some of the job classifications have not been updated since 1970.
Right.
And so when you say that you've compared our job classifications to other municipalities or utility agencies, were you able to find the same in other cities that job classifications have not been updated for?
So we did initially review those, what you're saying, 30-year-old job descriptions, but
more like 45.
But we then conducted a series of meetings over a number of months with subject matter experts from each member of the water, power, and joint team that could provide us with additional insight into the roles and how the roles at DWP maybe differed or didn't or were similar to the roles within the market. So we relied heavily on the collaboration between the DWP and ourselves in order to understand the roles fully.
So, Commissioner, I think that's a key point what you bring up, and that was really the reason we had the 3 or 4 months worth of meetings, is to ensure everything was as accurate as possible. That last bullet, if you look on page 3, where it says position matching was completed before salary benchmarking to ensure independent, unbiased results. So they would compare what DWP positions were and what the actual subject matter experts were stating, and then compared it against the peer set. But they didn't know what the salaries were until they matched that, and that was done by Oliver Wyman to ensure that it was done before they knew what the salaries were. But it's exactly what you mentioned, yeah. They're old descriptions. That's why they had 4 months worth of meetings, is to ensure we were using the most accurate description.
I think this is an important point, and I know that politically this is very difficult. At the same token, I applaud our employees who service the LA community. At the same token, I do feel that it's really imperative to update these job classifications because there are, at times, a few people who state that a job classification does not describe their mandated responsibilities in 2017. And as a department legally, sometimes we have to cave in because the classifications are so outdated. So I think that's very important to note. And I know it's a very, very complex issue, but it's something that is, in my opinion, overdue.
So ultimately, we ended up with a group of 89 job classes that we were able to benchmark that were well-surveyed positions, and we, as a team, collaborated and felt were good matches. So those 89 class codes represented over 5,900 employees and roughly 60% of the organization. No, still no slides.
I guess
To add as a footnote to that, 60% coverage of the employees is, we understand, very good.
Right, that's right. Typically, when we conduct these sorts of studies, we're hoping for a sample of 40 to 50% of the organization, so 60% was really quite strong.
I guess we'll go. We'll go. I don't think it's going to come up.
Okay, so we're moving to slide 4 now. This is a kind of a high-level summary of the results of our analysis. You can see in the pie chart on the left, 58 of the 89 benchmark job classes fell into either the first, second, or third quartile. I believe Jerry mentioned where the DWP's philosophy has been to target the second or third quartile.
Elizabeth, can you just give a little description of the quartiles, what they are, especially for the people that are listening in?
In terms of the first quartile being the lowest cost of
relative to the market.
25%,
The
right?
25th, 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 25th. The first quartile being the lowest cost quartile, and the median, of course, being in the middle, and then the fourth quartile where the salaries and compensation would be the highest cost.
Relative to the market.
Relative to the market.
Right. So as I was saying, 58 of the 89 fall into either the first, second, or third quartile. 35% of the class codes, or the remaining 31, were in the fourth quartile, represented by the red pie. And then the additional detail on the right-hand side in the bar chart is the number of class codes that were more than 10% above the third quartile, et cetera.
So Elizabeth, in summary, when you're looking at where we have the higher pay relative to the peer set, right, you end up, that note you have on the right of the 7 and then the 10 class, just a brief description of that.
Right, so one thing to note is generally when we're conducting market analyses, we consider anything within 10% of targeting positioning to be pretty good, a pretty fair representation. So that's why this yellow bar here, or these 14 class codes are yellow. They're 10% above the third quartile. They're within, a reasonable range. And then as you progress, you get higher, further away from the third quartile. The orange bar represents the 10 class codes that are between 10 and 20% above the third quartile. And then the 7 are more than 20% above the third quartile. And we're going to drill down into kind of what results we see to that on the next slides. Sorry, go ahead.
The data for this was for the 4 quarters ending fall 2015. So it's lagging. We'd expect by this point in time there have been adjustments to both the rest of the industry, and there's an upcoming or an adjustment that's just occurred for DWP.
So if we turn to slide 5, we can drill down into the detail a little bit more. This is comparing base salaries, annualized base salaries at the DWP to annualized base salaries within the market. And we have 3 bars here, and it represents, we've broken them into to what we call a salary band. So for those positions that are typically paid within the market less than $100,000, those are represented in this first bar on the left side of your page. And you can see at the DWP that comprises 51 class codes and roughly 75% of the employees that we benchmarked. And as you go to the right, you can see we have a second salary band of $100,000 in one to $175,000, and that has fewer class codes and fewer employees. And you would expect that as you get higher paying employees, there's fewer of them within your organization.
Out of curiosity, I mean, is this the base salary or does this include overtime hours?
This is just base salary. We did not get into the overtime.
I think it's important to have a follow-up on that discussion.
Yeah. We have a slide
We'll get
later
to
on
it.
overtime.
Dr. Pickle will get to it at our tag team at the end.
So you can see in the bar chart on the far left that those at the DWP whose market salaries are less than $100,000 fall into the 4th quartile. They're about $3,500 above the 3rd quartile. And then as we progress into the higher salary ranges, the positioning relative to the median, I guess, improves or then falls. In the middle bar, the DWP is roughly $7,500 above the median, so we would say that's pretty close to the median and within the range. And then for those with the higher levels of salary, greater than $175,000, the DWP is positioned below market median in the 2nd quartile. Okay.
Just one comment.
Sure.
In addition to overtime hours, I'm curious to learn how our employees' pension plans compare to other
Yes.
utilities. Perfect.
We're going to get to that. Yes. So if we go to page 6, one thing that we found when we were doing the analysis, we compared the DWP to other utility companies, not just private utility companies, but also investor-owned, so public companies. And a majority of the peer set did provide bonuses to many of these positions. They were bonus-eligible positions. So in order to compare on an apples-to-apples basis cash compensation, we looked at, since DWP does not have a bonus program, we compared the salaries at the DWP to the total of salaries plus actual bonuses paid within the market. And you can see that it paints kind of a different picture. We have the same 3 bar charts, the same 3 salary bands, but the positioning is a little bit different. And in the case of those paid at greater than $175,000, the impact is that they're even lower in terms of the median. They're now in the 1st quartile relative to the market. Page 7 is a roll-up of all 89 class codes. So what this tells us is, the median salary at the DWP for those that we studied was $99,500, and among the peer set, the median was $99,800. So essentially, the DWP is essentially at the median over all of the 89 class codes studied. But as we drilled down into on the previous slides, we know that it paints a different picture as you drill into the data.
I comment at this point, on average, we're okay, but we're a little bit like the man with one foot in a bucket of ice and another foot in a fire. So there are things that need work here. In particular, the cash compensation for the leadership team is well below the industry median. And at the low end, it fits in many ways city policy. It's very egalitarian. But we have clear problems at the high end in terms of retaining people or getting outside hires in.
I could not agree more, and I hope that's an issue that we can address in the...
And now we have it documented in great detail.
Good.
Right.
Okay.
With that, any other questions on compensation? Commissioner, we're now going to move to retirement and then health and other benefits.
I'll still be here if you think of anything.
Comments? My colleague Heidi O'Brien will talk about the retirement cost on slide 8.
Okay. So what we did on the retirement front is we basically valued all of the plans at DWP and the comparator organizations and other utilities. And so that includes anything that the employer pays for, whether that's a defined benefit pension plan or whether it's an employer contribution to a defined contribution plan. In DWP's case, obviously that was just the pension. So what we did here is we have a blended LADWP cost of $14,500. Now that's a blend of individuals who are in the Tier 1 pension and also the individuals who are in the Tier 2 pension. This is wildly swayed toward Tier 1 since, as you know, there are very few people at this point who are in the Tier 2 pension. But what we would anticipate clearly over time is that as turnover continues to happen over time, your pension cost will come down because there will be more representation for folks who are in the Tier 2 pension.
And Heidi, let me make one comment. If you recall, back when the new contract came through, we were talking about how timely it was to have the new tier, which will help us out because the pension costs do move slowly. But we already have, I think, over 1,500 Tier 2 employees. And you'll see here the difference in cost is quite substantial.
Yeah,
but it was
meaningful.
important to do that, and that's what we talked about back when that new tier was put in.
So we looked at the DWP's cost relative to the investor-owned utility panel, which is on the left, and then the publicly owned utilities on the right. So the average, the 14.5, you can see relative to the IOUs falls in the second quartile. But if you look at these little green tick marks, you know, as Jeff just pointed out, there's a large disparity where Tier 1 falls just about at the median. Tier 2 is in the first quartile because those costs are far lower. Then if we look over at the public-owned utilities, the blended value is a little bit higher. It's just above median. Again, Tier 1 higher, falling in the third quartile, and Tier 2 again in the first quartile. The main reason that the positioning is different between the IOUs and the POUs is that we tend to see a little bit more value from the IOUs. That's largely because most of those utilities have both a defined benefit plan and also an employer-funded defined contribution plan. Whereas with the POUs, they're largely in the situation that the DWP is in, which it's just a defined benefit plan. So that's largely our findings on the retirement side. As I said, I think this picture will look a little bit different over time as you see more of a blend with Tier 2. Any questions on the retirement?
One point of clarification, could you clarify on normal cost versus average cost?
Thank you. That's a good point, Fred. So this cost is not necessarily going to tie off to the DWP's exact pension cost from an accounting standpoint. What we did here is we came up with what we call a normalized cost because every utility is going to have a different set of assumptions for accounting purposes. And what we did is we used one consistent set of assumptions across the DWP and all other utilities so that this is really done on an apples-to-apples basis.
And this is forward-looking. It doesn't look at any catch-up payments that are being made into pension plans to make up for prior disparities with the market. And in the case of DWP, that's a big difference. It's about a 3-to-1 difference in cost. So what the numbers here are important for competition in terms of getting new employees, retaining employees, because what the employee looks at is essentially the normalized cost.
That's right. Okay.
We'll move on to health and benefits with my colleague Chuck Hartwig on slide 9.
Hi, Chuck Hartwig from Mercer. This slide depicts kind of the work that we did in the health and benefits area. First of all, just to capture all the information, we covered medical, dental, life insurance, and long-term disability here, as well as post-employment or retiree medical coverage provided. You'll see that On the bottom, LADWP spends on average about $22,000 per employee for all of these benefits. And that is composed primarily of medical. Medical is about 80% of that cost. I should say that's active medical. And the result is, in comparison to both panels, the expenses end up in the fourth quartile. So your benefits are, in this space, more generous in general than what either of the panels indicates. And really the key components that drive that are simply richer benefit designs, lower contributions for employees, and to some extent, the more expensive plans that you have to offer in the Owens Valley segment of the population. Retiree medical contributes some, but it is not a huge factor in the overall result here. Any questions?
I have a question. So Commissioner Fleming and I serve on the Owens Valley Committee, and we're very, very grateful for the ranchers, the farmers who are taking care of DWP-owned land. At the same token, it's a huge investment on the department's part because the property taxes alone, we're definitely in the red compared to the rent that we receive. And I think it's important to get more information as to your statement about the plans, higher costs for staff assigned to Owens Valley, because I think it would make sense to understand the number of staff, the difference in delta, and how we can address that, because as it is, we're in the red. So if you could follow up with that information, that'd be appreciated.
And I think what came in your package is a larger Oliver Wyman, which is the more detailed study. And Commissioner, if you could look at page 21 on that, it has the number of employees, what the contribution and what the net annual cost is per employee. And it's really something that I think it's just to point out that it's higher cost there. It's something that we're probably going to have to continue with just because there isn't the competition in the Owens Valley. And you can see down the bottom there, the two Owens Valley plans, they're about double of what the plans are in the LA area. And that's just...
But by the same token, we're talking 350 employees
Right.
out of nearly 10,000.
Right.
So how can that make such a difference?
It is a contributing factor,
Right.
but it's not the fundamental factor that's causing the overall result here.
So then I don't understand your third bullet for that reason. On page 9.
Well, I think it is a contributing factor. Whether we're overstating it as a major factor, that's not the intent here. It was just an observation.
It's something that I think we all recognize, just I think as you do. We're going to have to continue doing that because it's such an important asset to the department.
No, there's no doubt about that. But we're talking 350 employees, compared to 10,000.
Right.
So I don't understand why that was listed as a bullet point as the reason why we're in the highest bracket for healthcare.
Right. It just drives the cost up by $600. So where you look there, DWP is 22.1. If we didn't have to do that, it would be less by 600. So again, it's a contributing factor, but it's not the sole reason at all.
I agree.
The detailed components of this buildup, this is not just healthcare. Back on the summary document by Oliver Wyman, pages 45 through 49 list the other components of health and other components of these costs. So medical is fourth quartile, post-retirement medical is fourth quartile, dental is fourth quartile. Other components are median or below.
Right.
Yep.
So we now have a slide. So we've looked at salaries, including incentives. We've looked at retirement. We've looked at health and other benefits. And this is a roll-up of those three components. This is compared generally to investor-owned utilities, showing that in total, the cost to the DWP is about $136,000 at the median. And if you look across the three components, the DWP ranks about the median compared to the IOUs. As Dr. Pickle pointed out, though, for example, in the first bar, we have two different stories once you dig into the detail. Fourth quartile at the lower band, lower positions. First quartile, relatively lower paid management employees at the upper salary bands. So on average, we look okay, kind of at the median. There's still work to do to think about how those the detail will work out.
The one thing that I failed to see in the summary
Yep.
is overtime pay. Is that included?
Yep, it's going to come. Dr. Pickle's going to talk about that in
Okay.
a couple. So this is
Because
excluding overtime. It just has cash comp, any incentives that not the DWP pays, but others pay, especially on the IOU side. Retirement, the cost of retirement benefits, health and benefits. I will tell you, working with the utility management teams around the country, this kind of cost of labor, as Dr. Pickle talked about, is one of the 5 key strategic issues of most utilities, both from a productivity point of view, but of course the cost side. So this kind of treating all these components together as a bundle and looking at your cost structure in total is something that many senior teams and boards look at.
And Jerry, in general, where do you want to be on that right-hand side?
I think, first quartile has its problems. Fourth quartile, of course, raises flags. Where we're at in the medium isn't too bad overall. But we still need to, as we need to think about the sides, the bands on either side. Similar story if you compare in aggregate against the publicly owned utilities. Again, the DWP across the 3 components of compensation, excluding overtime, ranks just about in the median level.
I appreciate the wink. I like winking. But that being said, given my understanding of our MOU with the unions, I do think that it would have been appropriate to have included overtime because it's a huge factor in the summary. So I don't understand why that was left out because I do think that the chart would have looked differently. That's just my humble opinion.
Let me talk to you about overtime.
Right here.
We didn't say no, we didn't leave overtime out easily. Overtime information is available for the publicly owned utilities in California because of a California State Controller combined database of salaries for all California entities. So that information is out there. In addition, we've been able to add in a couple other publicly owned utilities, Seattle and Austin. And we have that database. That database doesn't perfectly coordinate with the salary information we have. Getting information on investor-owned utilities is difficult. The industry association, the Edison Electric Institute, tried to collect that data, and the investor-owned members were not happy to give that data because they perceived it to be competitively important information relative to the retention of employees. And we talked to one of the other competing experts for the Mercer Group on that, and he said he had worked for Edison Electric Institute. He's been trying to collect it for most of his career. It's not available. So we don't have it just for Mercer. We have it from some of their competitors. That it's difficult to get, and no one does have a comprehensive database across the industry on overtime. That said, That said, on your slide, we have a summary of the information that we do have on publicly owned utilities in California, on cash compensation for overtime. And DWP is high in that respect in terms of the percentage of employees covered by overtime and in the peak dollar amounts. The median is somewhat high in comparison to that. If we look into that data, there's a small segment of employees that is very high, but most of those employees are in parts of DWP that appear to be short-staffed. So there's work to be done on that, and cash compensation on overtime is only part of the story. There's another component in terms of time off in lieu of cash compensation, and that is something that needs to be addressed at the next stage of this process. And Jeff will talk about the next stage of this process. At this stage, what we've focused on is what is the price of labor. We haven't looked at the quantity. The numbers you've seen are position-weighted averages. That is, if there are 300 janitors, that counts as one janitor. If there's one GM, that counts as one GM. This is the standard industry approach to look at wage without looking at the staffing levels. The next approach is on staffing levels and other components of cost.
What I'd like to state is that I am a huge proponent. I'm thrilled that General Manager Wright is directing this department, and we've spent quite a bit of time talking about hopefully executing the right mannerisms and legalities to hire the right people, to pay them appropriately, because this utility is invaluable to so many people. And so hopefully in the future we will have more flexibility in having the ability to hire the right people and compensate them properly. What perturbs me is I know for a fact, having served on several committees, that there are certain individuals who definitely take advantage of overtime issues. And in fact, we've listened to grievances about one day of overtime not being accepted because a specific individual was in training. So, we deal with this minutia, but this minutia leads to spending a lot of money. And I would hope that, I want every single employee of the department to be paid appropriately. At the same token, I would hope for more flexibility in hiring the right people and the few exceptions not taking advantage of the system.
So if we move to the final slide, and again, these are the recommendations and next step. And one of the big steps that we need to talk about is just, Commissioner, what you're bringing up is the overtime. So we did the first phase of benchmarking. If you recall, we looked at power O&M, water O&M. Those were essentially near the median. We know our power distribution cost was a little higher. Our system losses were a little higher. Reliability for both was pretty good. We just went through this study, which shows the wages and benefits are near the median. As we've talked about, some are a little high, some are low, but in combination, they're about at the median. Our next step that we're considering is the function name. For example, distribution O&M, which would be for power, is on a dollar per customer basis. Now we're going to break that down into the sub-functions. And what's important is there's three ways you can have the cost for that. One is regular labor, which would be tied back to the wages. Number two is overtime. And number three is contract costs. So what we want to do is break out those sub-functions against the utility peer sets and look at, are we high, are we low in the regular labor, overtime, and contract costs. I think in general we're going to find we're probably, certainly on the overtime maybe higher in some of those sub-functions. What really matters is the dollars per customer, because that's, the customer ultimately is just going to pay a dollar value, but it's going to provide a lot of insight to us as to where do we have opportunities for using more or less labor, more or less overtime, more or less contractors? So, but it really comes down to the dollar per customer for the sub-function. So this is what we've talked about with the RPA and his staff, and we're looking at moving forward, because then when we identify a key business process that's higher, and we know is it higher in regular labor, overtime, or contract spend, we can then start looking at process improvement, business process improvement specifically for that. And that would be consistent with what we talked about back in 2015. I'll let Fred talk about the last two bullets.
One, LADWP should participate in periodic utility surveys as part of the industry. DWP has not participated in these so far, and we think that's an important step. All utilities, publicly owned or investor-owned, hate talking about wages in public. And this is an important step for this utility to have this discussion and to have done this position matching. My office believes that DWP can better explain future rate increases if they update this benchmarking in advance of the future rate proposal. So we're proposing we repeat this in the future. It'll be easier next time because the position matching has been done and it will only need to be updated. But we think that's an important step.
I cannot agree more fully. And, you know, time and again, this board has provided annual fees to the department to collaborate with other utilities to share information on case studies, new technologies. So why isn't this information being shared? And is it just us, or is it other cities as well that just don't want to share this information?
We will participate. I'll absolutely make that commitment. I'm not sure why we haven't in the past, but we will moving forward. Some utilities don't want to because they'd rather not share the news. As the ratepayer advocate said, utilities don't like to share this in public. And it's mostly because, in my opinion, their main competitors are a private entity, the investor-owned utilities. So it's very hard to kind of get a comparison across the industry. It seems the comparison is just more lopsided to a smaller group of utilities.
Yeah, I think that puts us, you know, in the same situation in that we're also competing to retain labor and not have private enterprises take away trained, valuable employees. And so if we're paying these annual fees to collaborate with other utilities, I would think that it would make sense to share that information if we are truly in an authentic membership with other utilities.
While the base salary information is broadly shared throughout the industry, the number of companies sharing the compensation information was more than 1,500. The retirement and health benefit calculations need to be done on a custom basis to measure benefits, so you end up doing a limited group of entities, as cited in the slides. But the information that's not out there is overtime. There is some push in other states. I believe there's a study coming up in New York that's requiring the utilities to come forth with their overtime information. I don't know if that's happening in California, but there is a push to get some more of this information out, and we'll watch that so that we can see if we can more broadly survey overtime. Right now, we're dealing with a limited set of information on overtime. We hope to bring that out more in the next step, but not just the compensation, but the effect on work processes.
Yeah, and I would hope whoever is leading these collaborations, the annual membership fees that we pay for to collaborate with other utilities, makes a point of emphasizing the importance of sharing that information. And I'm sure legally there's a way to perhaps execute a non-disclosure agreement, but as long as the GM is aware and can make a comparison, that I think would be a good first step.
Other comments? Thank you very much. Very, very helpful. So I see that the open session items are scheduled for after 12:30. So does that essentially require that we go into closed session at this point?
There's still one item that we could take out of order, and that's the filed items, because on our notice, we put that the vote items will not take place till after 12:30. So we could take the filed items out of order.
Well, let's do
if
that.
the board would like.
So we move to item 9, RPS monthly report for November.
I think the report stands. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Questions? No questions. Investment report for a quarter ending September 30th.
Again, any questions there may be related to the report, you have an
Any
answer?
questions? No questions. This is taking up a lot of time. But it was a good idea. Item 10, Barbara?
For item 10, we have no community impact statements or formal positions were filed by any neighborhood councils on the items on today's agenda.
Okay, so I think, council, we've exhausted the pre-12:30 open session items that
We have, Mr.
can be
President.
exhausted.
So at this point, we will recess into a closed session and then reconvene in open session no sooner than 12:30, but probably at 12:30.
Yeah, I would assume for those interested that I'd be surprised if it's after 12:30 at this point. Okay, thank you.
Nice.
It's a valiant effort.
Seriously? No, they look chic, don't they?
Those are the ones you never lose. It's like sunglasses.
At which all commissioners were present. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. Those in favor? Aye. They're approved. Are there between, well, item 15's been deferred, so we have 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Do any commissioners wish to pull any of those items for discussion? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve all of those items?
So moved.
Second. Those in favor?
Aye.
They're approved. Meeting is adjourned.